Have you ever examined your exercise routine to be sure that it wasn't slowly and silently wearing down cartilage, fraying tendons, or screwing up your posture? Would you even know what to look for to see if it was? Well, fortunately, that's what this video is all about. Take my 4 training principles to maximize results and minimize injury, run it against your current program, and see how it measures up. Principle number 1, use free weights. Now, by free weights, I mean quite literally weights that move freely. Now, this could be anything from a dumbbell, barbell, kettlebell, sandbag, sack of potatoes, small human being, whatever, doesn't matter. As long as this weight moves freely and you're the one who controls it. Now, this is in comparison to, say, a machine that you would use at the gym. Let's paint the picture a little bit more clearly, all right? So, overhead pressing, all right? Pressing weight overhead. The machine version, you're going to grab a seat on the bench. So now your pelvis is stabilized by the bench. There's a pad for your back, which is now helping to stabilize your core for you. And now you put your hands on the grips and you press the weight up overhead. Now, once you get it up there, this weight isn't going anywhere except coming right back down. Smooth, clean, looks beautiful, even if what you're doing is not beautiful. You could be pressing it in all sorts of weird ways and twisting and contorting, but the weight's just going to go up and down. That's it. No stabilization required on your part. Now, I want to compare this to, say, a dumbbell press. Standing. You're standing on your own 2 feet. That's your base of support rooted into the ground, which is what you usually stand on, is your own feet. Good practice there. So next, you got to have the skills to be able to lock in and stabilize your pelvis, and then in turn taking it next up to your core. You have to be able to stabilize your core so you can protect your lower back. It doesn't get hurt. Otherwise, you can get up there and do some funny things to your lower back. And now as you actually take these dumbbells, which are moving freely, and press them up overhead, you actually now have to have the muscular coordination in your shoulder girdle to keep the weight stable and not flailing all over the place. Now, yes, it is a bit more complex than the machine, but the complexity is very, very valuable because when you have to take a piece of luggage and put it in the overhead compartment on the airplane, or you're taking something off the top shelf in the closet, and you're actually sliding something in or out, and you're reaching up high, you actually have to stabilize it for you. There's no machine doing that. And this is where some people can get injured if they don't actually have the ability to stabilize their shoulder girdle or their core, and then in return, their spine. This is where they put themselves into an awkward position with weight that moves around, and they can hurt themselves. So, again, this is principles to maximize results and minimize injury. Free weights are awesome. Principle number 2, train all 7 fundamental movement patterns. So what is a fundamental movement pattern? Well, I like to compare them to the primary colors. We all know that if you have all of the primary colors on your palette, you can combine them to create any other color. Now, with the 7 fundamental movement patterns, there are basic movements that as long as you can do them all well, you can combine them to create a whole host of other varieties of movements and activities. What are they? Here we go. You've got a push, a pull, there's a hip hinge, a squat, lunge, rotation or anti-rotation, which is resisting rotational forces, and then there's a carry. And a carry is basically just taking something heavy and walking with it. It could be at your sides, chest, overhead, one arm, 2, whatever. That's your carry. We recognize all these fundamental movement patterns already, right? We've done them all in some way, whether it's at the gym or just in everyday life. They're essential. Now, why is this important again? Well, one, I already said that you can combine them to create a whole bunch of other activities. So when you practice these fundamental patterns, you're getting really good at doing a whole lot of other stuff. You're getting the skills, the balance, the strength for it. Great. But going farther than that, it's also really crucial to preventing against injury. Now, we all know, right, we kind of have a guttural sense that if you just kind of perform the same tasks or the same exercises, the same patterns over and over and over again, that's a great way to give yourself an overuse injury. You're constantly wearing down those tissues, the joint in the same pattern. There's always the same line of friction. Some muscles get overdeveloped, others get ignored, and then therefore they get weak. It pulls the body out of alignment. You end up with bad posture. It leads to impingement, knees, all sorts of stuff. So I think you're getting the sense that, like, if you do a variety of movements, it helps to keep the musculature of the body balanced and then therefore prevents against injury. Got it? Good. Principle number 3, use progressions and regressions. All right, here they go. Ready? So first off, there's range of motion, intensity, or the amount of weight that you use. There is volume, complexity, stability, tempo or speed, and then there's work to restorations. So whenever I start with a new client, I always want to make sure that we find the version of each of the fundamental movement patterns that are most appropriate to where they're currently at, as far as ability, skill, experience, and whatnot. So, and then moving forward, it's always important to use progressions, because otherwise an exercise can get to be a little too easy, it gets boring, you're not making progress as much. It keeps you engaged, right? But also, I don't usually want to have people making progressions in more than one variable at a time, especially at the beginning, because you might actually if you make it hard on several different levels, it might actually be too challenging. You could set yourself up either for a failed movement or perhaps even an injury. Now, regressions are also extremely important. And now you might want to use a regression if you're coming back to an exercise program and you've maybe been injured for a while or sick, or you've taken some time off and you want to take it back a little bit. Or maybe another way in which you would want to use a regression is if you're actually looking to work on one variable, you might want to back off on the other. So let's just say you want to work on getting a bigger range of motion that you can work through. You might want to back off on the weight. Makes sense, right? Okay. Now, I just want to make a little side note here as far as some things that I've seen out there in the fitness world these days regarding stability. Just because you can make something harder doesn't necessarily make it better. Sometimes you're just making yourself more prone to getting an injury. So an example would be the Bosu ball, right? So you might be getting really good at your squat and you're looking for the next way to make it harder, and you've seen people squat while standing on a Bosu ball. Now, for those of you who don't recall, a Bosu ball is basically like a half giant rubber sphere with a platform through it. And you can either stand on the platform or you can flip it over and stand on the round side. Now, yes, it can be harder, and it doesn't mean that, I'm not saying that you shouldn't ever do it or it's a bad thing, but I want you to think about why you're doing it, right? Would you be better off maybe working on getting stronger or working on range of motion? Because working on your stability while standing on this big wobbly thing doesn't necessarily carry over to everyday life, unless you actually stand on wobbly things either for a living as a circus performer or you're a surfer or whatever. Then maybe that applies. And maybe you like to do it and it's pretty safe and you're safe doing it, but because it's fun. Great. But if you're doing it to get better at squatting, then I really want you to take a step back and say, well, do I actually squat this way in everyday life? Or would I be better off using more weight? Because being stronger is really helpful in certain circumstances. And being able to maybe work on the range of motion and get lower is also really helpful when you want to, I don't know, get down, up and down off the ground. It's really convenient to have that range of motion. So all I'm simply saying is, when you play with your progressions and regressions, think as to why you're doing it and make sure you've got a good reason. Principle number 4, work to balance joint mobility and joint stability. This is really the easiest one out of all 4 here today, so this is going to be quick. Ready? If a joint is too tight, you want to work on getting it more flexible. If it's too loose, you want to work on getting it more stable. And the reason being is to prevent against injury. So if your muscles around your joint, let's just use the shoulder, it's really easy. If they're too loose, you run the risk of a dislocation. It doesn't have the strength to stabilize the humeral head in that socket and to keep it in its place when you're doing different things. That's a shitty injury to have, right? Dislocation, not fun. So on the other side, if it's too tight, let's just say if your hips are too tight and you don't have the range of motion to either squat down low enough or to give a good hip hinge to pick something up off the floor, if you don't have that range of motion in your hips, what a lot of people end up doing is they end up making up the difference with their lower back. And they end up asking the joints in their lower back, their lumbar spine, to bend more than they really should and more often than they should, or that it's really designed to. And they end up getting disc injuries and they're wearing out the vertebrae and the discs in between their lumbar spine. So that's another injury that you can end up with. And that sucks as well. You can also end up tearing some muscle tissue if you too forcefully go to an end range in a joint that's too tight. None of that is fun. So again, muscles that are too tight, you're going to do some different types of soft tissue work, get a massage, acupuncture, foam rolling, and then do mobility work to free it up and work on increasing your range of motion. If it's too loose, you want to strengthen the muscles around that joint to add stability. Well, there you got it. That's my 4 training principles to maximize results and minimize injury. Take a step back and look at your current program. How many did you get? You got at least 2 or 3 worked in there? You have all 4, that's awesome. And also, if you've got a friend or a buddy that you think could benefit from some of this information, why don't you go ahead and be a buddy, and there's a button around there somewhere, maybe over here or something like that. Go ahead and click it, share it on your Facebook or whatever social media you're on right now, and help a buddy out. You also help me out. See you next time. Okie dokie. So, what we've got here. All right.